So welcome back to Wheels and Toys. My name is Fabe and this is the Porsche Taycan. It's the first fully electrical car from Porsche and I think they've done a pretty good job. From my point of view, it looks amazing from whatever angle you look at it. If you look at all the press pictures, it's just stunning. I think they managed to capture those shapes from the 911 all through the sort of the rear and the sloping back of the car, but also the front. And if you put the 992 next to this, it's just almost an inch in difference. Actually, a little bit less if you have this put in its lower mode. The Taycan comes in many different flavors. First we have the sedan, which you have right here. Came out first, followed by the Cross Turismo. It's basically a sort of estate version of the Taycan, with also a little bit more plastic, making it seem to be a little bit more suited to go off-road. I also think that looks really nice, especially if you have the ski box on top. Then came the version of the Taycan called the GTS, that says just be like below the turbo but above the 4S. And that was released as well as something they call the Sport Turismo. And the Sport Turismo shares the styling from the sedan, but has that extra luggage space from the Cross Turismo. The Sport Turismo also share the engine setups and the drivetrain setup from the sedan. And once you decided upon what body shape you're going for, it's time to decide on what engines, or basically what model you're looking for. But they are all fast enough, trust me. So the base Taycan takes you from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour or 0 to 62 in just 5.4 seconds. That's quick, especially if you think of this as your daily sedan. Then you have the 4S, which will do the same sprint in 4 seconds, followed by the GTS in 3.7, then the Turbo in 3.2. But remember, that's like McLaren 650S territory. Then you have the range-topping Turbo S. It does that in an amazing 2.8 seconds. And as these are Porsches, you're most likely looking at a little bit less in good conditions. But at the end of the day, does those numbers really matter? No, not really. Because this is where you find yourself most of the time. Going down the highway at a constant pace, with the car put in range mode, and your eyes constantly looking at how far you can go before you need to charge up. And that's the reality with an EV these days. The range anxiety is real, and hopefully that'll change over time. But right now, this is mostly what you do, because let's face it, the Taycan is a big car. It's a car that people buy to go places rather than to go for a Sunday drive. And when you want to go places, having to stop one more time for 20 more minutes to charge up might just be a deal breaker. So, except for those time to times when you want to show your pals how quick these cars really are from 0 to 60 or 0 to 100, you do this. Sit here, car driving itself, you just watching the environment, having a really nice time, because it's a super nice drive, or should I say ride. So right now I'm just having the car put in the drive on, drives itself. I'm just sitting here. And that brings us to a big problem with the Taycan, the price. You see, if you buy a regular petrol engine car such as the Porsche 911, if you get the regular Carrera, or if you get the top spec Turbo S, there's a big difference in what you actually get. So you get different engines, different gearboxes, different body style, and you even get much more exclusive materials in, let's say, the exhaust. But that's not the case with the Taycan. So when you get the Taycan, it's the same body style, it's the same brakes, or at least you can spec the same brakes for all the cars. It's the same chassis. So the air ride suspension from the 4S and upwards can be spec'd to the base Taycan as well. The only difference in the Taycan models are the engine setup, since there's no exhaust. And it's the same gearbox for all the cars as well. But the base Taycan gets one engine. It's because it's rear wheel drive. But if you get the 4S, the GTS, the Turbo, or the Turbo S, you get the same electrical engines, just in a different combination. So of course it's not the same engines in the 4S as in the Turbo S, but it's a collaboration or a mix of different versions. And that's the only thing. But if you look at what Porsche charge you for those different engines, and of course a little bit of a tune, it's a big difference. Sure, you get a lot of the standard equipment on the Turbo S is quite expensive if you want to spec that to a base Taycan. But as we just talked about, this is what you do most of the time. Going along on the freeway, and as they all do that equally good, do you need the biggest engines? Because that would also mean they take more power. So when you really step on it, you will lose sort of like how far you can actually go in these cars. But let's look at how much they actually cost. So first we have the base Taycan with 471 horsepower, and that's 100,000 euros. A little bit depending on where you live, of course, in the world. Followed by the 4S with 571 horsepower, and that's 120,000 euros. Then you have the GTS with 598 horsepower, and that's 145,000 euros. Then the Turbo, that has 680 horsepower, and it's 168,000 euros. And on top of that, of course, you have the range-topping Turbo S that has a crazy 761 horsepower, but that's 200,000 euros. Sure, you get a lot of the the optional extras on the base Taycans are you get for free on the Turbo and the Turbo S. And speccing one of these, you're looking at around at least 15 to 25,000 euros extra before it's spec'd to where you basically want these cars to be. But if you consider that the Turbo S is twice the price of the base Taycan, and as we talked about, they do what you use this car for equally good. If you get the base Taycan, you get 100,000 euros extra to spend on options. And here are my top 5 favorites that I think you should consider if you get one of these cars. The first one I would say is Porsche InnoDrive, and that's Porsche's answer to the self-driving car. It's not as advanced as Teslas are in the US, but they are just as advanced as Teslas are here in Sweden and in most countries in Europe. It's perfect for that time when you really want to just sit back in the car and just cover miles. Just put the car in InnoDrive and relax and enjoy that amazing ride that these cars are. The second one is leather interior. This car actually doesn't have it, and you can see it's kind of like it's a good material, but it's not as plush as you want it to be in one of these cars. I know it's kind of pricey, it's almost 4,000 euros, but if you get it in the interior, got all of these parts, all the dash, the doors, the seats, and almost everything else covered in real good leather. And that will not only age better than this material most likely will, but it also gives that really a little bit more plush interior feel and a much more sort of luxury feeling of the car. The third thing would be the panoramic glass roof. It gives this cabin a much more luxurious feel, feels airier, feels bigger, and it gives you that very welcome extra centimeters in the top if you're carrying a little bit taller passengers. It also gives this space back here a really nice feeling to it. And option number 4 would be to get the sound isolated side windows. Once again, this car does not have it. And that's something you really want to have. And I realized that after spending a lot of miles in this car is that in an EV, you don't have much other sounds. So everything that comes into the cabins are rather noise than sound. So get those isolated windows. And the 5th one is adaptive air ride suspension. It comes standard on the 4S and upwards, and it's something you should really spec if you're getting the base Taycan. When you want to have a comfy ride, that air ride really helps. It also gives you the opportunity to go from a very low chassis setup to medium, and you can even go for a lift. But one last option that you might consider getting, especially if you live in a colder climate such as I do, is all-wheel drive. And you get that for the 4S and upwards, but you also get that for all the Cross Turismo cars. Not the Sport Turismo, but the Cross Turismo. And I think it's a massive step up, and it's something that's really nice for these big cars. Actually, so nice that I bought one. I bought this car. It's my new daily driver, the Taycan 4S. I've had it for a couple of weeks now, and I just love it. It's a great step up from the Macan that we had it for almost 6 months and sold it to get this one. And I think Porsche done a great job when it comes to building a sports sedan and a sports EV. I would even go so far that I would say it's the best car I've ever driven. It's the best car I ever owned. It's not the best sports car, maybe, but it's the best car. It's the best thing on 4 wheels to take me places. And for that time, once in a while, when you really want to step on it, it does that good as well. It's a really, maybe not the most spirited drive, but it's always a pleasure drive. So if you haven't had time to try one of these out, go ahead and do it. But be aware, you might just end up here having one more car in the driveway and having to explain to your partner why there's less space by the house and why there's a big hole in your bank account. But it's worth it. It's a great car, I love it, and you'll see more about it and more from it in the future. But until then, thank you for tuning in and consider subscribing. We just hit 1,000 subscribers, and thank all of you who subscribes already. Bye.